Hello, and welcome back to the land of the niche. So, this is going to be another episode in our series I'm calling The Poetics of, in which we take a look at various pieces of media that aren't explicitly presented as being poetry, and taking a look at the various poetic techniques and stylistic choices that they use, and seeing how by studying those and looking at those we can gain a better understanding of the piece as a whole. So today we're going to be taking a look at Wind Up by Cecilia Immergreen. So this is another song, and I mentioned this before in other episodes, but to clarify, songs and poetry have a lot in common, but they are different pieces of media. So if this was to be a full study of the song and its musical techniques as well, we would be able to look at things, for example, is there a key change at any point in the song? Because musicians often use things like key changes to draw your attention to a certain moment, or to indicate that there is some sort of transition occurring with the themes or attitudes of the song. For this series, we're just going to be taking a look at the lyrics and basically treating it like it was a poem. So, with that being said, I think we should jump right into verse 1 and take a look at the various things we can find by a closer reading. So, the verse goes, "I'll waste away all night and day. Perfection, you elude me. Give up and stay. It's fine this way. Let's fall asleep today." So right from that first get-go of reading it, we can see that there's a rhyme scheme of away, day, stay, way, and today. I'm going to jump more into that and why that's extremely interesting. But first, let's take a look at some of the actual meaning of what we're getting from a first impression. So, the speaker begins by saying they'll waste away all night and day. Now, from that first reading, it's not immediately clear whether this is sort of a celebration of indolence or if this is sort of a frustrated sense of wasting away. In the 19th century, we had the Romantic movement, and the Romantic movement was extremely influential, and we still see its influence in modern media today. And one of the things that happened in the Enlightenment movement, which was before the Romantic movement, was there was such an emphasis on reason, scientific thinking, and a sort of machine-like efficiency that work ethic towards this sense of, a more scientific, mathematical way of living was emphasized so much that the Romantics then sort of pushed against this. And they were stating that there were value in things that were maybe not seen as immediately productive, things like indolence. So, I immediately think of John Keats's Ode to Indolence. And there's also stuff such as Wordsworth's The Tables Turned. And honestly, a few other John Keats's works, such as Wine, Women, and Snuff. There's sort of a celebration of indolence in that there can be a real value to the sort of daydreaming and restfulness that comes with that. And so, for example, in the Wordsworth poem, there is a character who is trying to rouse Wordsworth to do his homework and his studies, and he's up, go to your books, do your studies, no more laziness, get to work. And Wordsworth responds by saying that there's as much value in sort of staying in a relaxed state and observing nature and letting your mind wander as there is value in studying, and you kind of need both. You can't just completely brush aside indolence and only work, because you'll be missing out on this extremely valuable other side of the coin. And so here, I'm not sure yet if in this poem the narrator is sort of going to be doing a celebration of indolence, or if perhaps this is sort of a front to sort of resist feelings of insecurity or something like that. And the reason I say that is because the next line is, "Perfection, you elude me." So in poetry, since your word count is significantly less than you would find in a short story or a novel, every single word choice matters, because word choice not only can give a more specific image or, describe a sensation better, but it can also give a better sense of the narrator's perspective on the theme. So by the narrator describing perfection as something that eludes them, we get the impression that they are pursuing perfection. They want perfection, but they can't get it. If they were to say something different about like, oh, perfection, run away, I don't care sort of thing, sort of a I release you perfection, then it would be, a piece about someone ultimately not caring about perfection at all. But at this point, in this sort of stanza / verse, our narrator clearly actually does care about perfection. Even though they try to say it's fine this way, we once again get sort of negative sounding words like give up and stay. Giving up always has a sort of negative connotation. As for stay is sort of an interesting word choice here, since stay implies that you are staying in either a sort of a state or a location or a mentality, something like that. So when the narrator is saying that they will just give up and stay, one has to ask what, where and what is this state or location or mentality that they are going to stay. And it seems, based on the context of this piece, that they are thinking they're going to be staying in a state of imperfection. So they view themselves as imperfection. Because by saying stay, it also implies that they are already there. So the narrator of this piece doesn't think, I am currently at the prime of my performance ability, but maybe I'll take a break and it's okay if I sort of fall into imperfection. But instead, no, they're saying that they are going to stay in the state of imperfection. So they view themselves as already there. And then they say, let's fall asleep today. Which is interesting because that last line specifically feels like it sort of resonates with the Ode to Indolence, and Wordsworth has another piece that's sort of described as a message delivered by a young boy to his sister, in which he says, oh, put down your books, put down your work, don't bring any sort of work with you today, just put on your woodland dress and let's just give this one day into indolence. And it's again sort of a celebration of like, it's okay sometimes to just, fall asleep and sort of enjoy a sense of relaxation and leisure. However, to go back to that rhyme scheme, I wanted to talk about why I think that's so interesting. So let me just get a different color font here, or ink, I should say. So we have an A rhyme, an A rhyme, an A rhyme, A rhyme, and A rhyme. But specifically in this line, there isn't the A rhyme. And so in poetry, rhymes, I think some people think that poetry rhyme schemes are something you just have to follow extremely rigidly, and it's sort of like if you follow this rhyme scheme, you can then call your poem a sonnet, or for example. However, rhyme schemes also lend themselves to a sort of musicality, and that sort of musicality can often lull you to a sense of sort of relaxation. And so it can sometimes make it so you almost start to pay a little less attention because you sort of get lulled into a calm state of this sort of fluid rhyme scheme. So when the speaker breaks the rhyme scheme and doesn't follow it, it naturally draws your ear to that line and you pay more attention to what's being said because it sort of breaks the trance of the rhyme scheme. And so here we see that this line is actually extremely important because it is telling us that perfection eluding them is an issue, and it's very much on their mind, and they want to draw attention to this. It's also sort of interesting in sort of a meta sense that we have this almost perfect rhyme scheme going on where everything is A, but then in the line in which they're describing that perfection is eluding them, the rhyme scheme breaks, which, could almost be interpreted as sort of an imperfection within the verse. If it was, ending in another A rhyme, there would be sort of a perfect, neatly tied sense to it, but there isn't that. There is sort of this little artifact within it, because I won't actually say it's imperfection or something like that, because that would seem like I was talking about the actual writing skill and ability in sort of a reviewing sense, but I mean it's more of an artifact within that sort of neatly tied bow of rhyme. But it was very much intentional by the author to have that there. So again, I'm not saying this is an imperfect poem. I'm saying it is an intentional artifact, sort of breaking apart that otherwise perfect flow state. So extremely interesting that the line itself is about a lack of perfection, but also again, it tells us that to the speaker, this is something extremely important. And so I think as we go on with this poem, we should keep this specific line in mind and see how it informs our understanding of the following stanzas, the choruses, and the verses. So now we move into the chorus, and this is a pretty sizable stanza. So I think we should just jump right into it and start sort of dissecting what we can find and what sort of information we can get from it. And so it goes, and now we wind up high, yeah, the sky is the limit. They tell me reach further, too bad I can't fly. So now shut up, I'm trying, oh just give me a minute. You tell me reach further, too bad it's too high. And so we wind up high, yeah, the mind is your limit. I want to reach further, too bad that's a lie. So now shut up, I'm trying, please just give me a minute, or I'll fall apart for a while. So this piece is extremely interesting in that there seems to be an ongoing dialogue between, our narrator slash, almost poem's protagonist and this other voice, which is sort of depicting as being sort of a nagging and pushing voice that the narrator is sort of resisting. So, it says, and now we wind up high, yeah, the sky is the limit. They tell me to reach further, too bad I can't fly. So here there's already a frustration of people's expectations, the expectations of others versus the narrator's reality. So people are telling, Cecilia, the sky is the limit. So, you should therefore be reaching the sky. But, and you should be reaching further and further. But Cecilia is saying, I can't fly. But they're still trying, despite their sort of sense that this is sort of an unfair situation. But again, there's sort of there's this resistance and a sort of combat between these two voices. Just give me a minute. You can get the sense that they're feeling rushed. You tell me to reach further, too bad it's too high. So there's also, though, sort of a bit of doubt. Now, the one voice is saying to reach further, but by saying it's too high, that sort of language feels more like it's doubt rather than it's an actual estimation. And so we wind up high, yeah, the mind is your limit. I want to reach further, too bad it's a lie. That's a lie. So here we see that in this point, Cecilia doesn't want to actually reach. Now, one might say, well, why don't they want to reach further? And if we think of that previous stanza about perfection eludes me, it almost seems like they don't want to try to reach further unless they can do it perfectly. I think that pursuit of perfection is actually getting in their way and is sort of actually, if the mind is your limit and her mind is aiming for only perfection, well then her mind is her limit, but it's sort of a bad limit rather than being like the only thing holding you back is your mind. Instead, it's sort of that sense of she's actually limiting herself by her pursuit of perfection. So now shut up, I'm trying. Please just give me a minute or I'll fall apart for a while. This line is also interesting because, incorporating things like please in a sort of pleading rhetoric. There's a sort of like desperation, but also like a sort of exhaustion that we're getting. They just need a minute to basically catch their breath. They feel rushed. And that much is very much clear. Now, also looking at the sort of rhyme scheme, we've got limit, minute, fly, high, lie, and then while. And while breaks up the rhyme scheme again. So we sort of have an A, and then a B, and then a C. What's interesting with poetry that I always think is sort of a fun exercise to do, and it's really a cool thing about the medium. The medium. So the thing is with poetry, line breaks are, an extremely important part of the sort of the form. And so in other pieces of media like short stories, novels, other form of writing, we don't really use line breaks. We sort of end at the end of the sentence when we have punctuation. But in poetry, we end based on sort of the rhythm of the piece, but also we can emphasize things by putting them at the end of the line. So for example, this first line could have probably gone like, yeah, the sky is the limit, now we wind up high. But the narrator wanted to emphasize limit instead of high. So here we get the words limit, fly, minute, high, lie, and while. So what's interesting about those words is we can sort of garner sort of an understanding of the poem by just looking at the last words in each line. That's something you can do, especially with Shakespeare. If you're ever reading a piece of Shakespeare poetry and you're sort of struggling to understand what's actually going on with the line because he uses an older style of language than, what is colloquial today. You can look at the last words in each line and sort of get an impression of what he's talking about. So limit tells us that this is a speaker who is dealing with limits, and they might feel limited, or they're pursuing a limit. A limit seems to be sort of a goal or a feeling or something like that. It is an ending, and so they are hitting a limit. They want to be able to fly in this sense, but high. If you're trying to fly and then you're thinking of high, you think that perhaps something is too high, which is also we get the too high. Minute is, a measurement of time. And so it's usually sort of a rushed sense of time. If you only have a minute to do something, you feel rushed. Or, as they're saying in the full line, just give me a minute. But either way, it sort of brings about sense of time. So we have time, we have limit, we have this sense of things being high, which makes it seem like they might be far away or unobtainable. And so again, by looking at those, we can sort of get a bit of a sense for it, and then by reading the whole thing, we can get, a much better sense of what's being said here. But I just sort of wanted to show that because it's a fun exercise to do when doing close readings of poetry. I think the other thing I want to talk about is it's sort of an interesting is the we here. So there's multiple different, sort of categorizations here. We have we have they have I'm, and I can fly. Give me a minute, or I'll fall apart for a while, but we wind up. At this point in this sort of piece, I'm not fully sure who this we is. However, something that we could potentially garner from this is that since it's a we are winding up high and there's a they, it almost feels like Cecilia, or the speaker of this poem, is part of a group of people who are being told by someone else to do all of these things. Wind up high, pursue, fly, the sky is the limit, do all of this. And while these other people might be very successful at this, it feels like specifically Cecilia is struggling with her senses of perfection and her own self-doubt, and also perhaps her disinterest in even trying to reach further. So it seems like that's why she's saying, I'm trying, just give me a minute. You tell me to reach further, but it's too high. But then the group is winding up high, and the mind is your limit. So in that sense, I think there might be something like this going on, where she's not the only one pursuing whatever this, sky-high objective is, but she sees herself as being the only one struggling to actually obtain that objective. All right, and then we get to the second verse. So this one goes, you stay away, obsession no matter which way, perfection you seclude me. No more, no way, please you just lead me astray. These failures are all we pay. And so right from the get-go, I'm going to admit that I find this verse to be a lot more cryptic than the rest of the poem songs thus far. And I think part of what is sort of cryptic about this is this use of you and me and we that we're seeing throughout the piece seems to sometimes change meaning. For example, in this first line, I'm not sure if the you here means, sort of an obsession with perfection. Like, okay, my obsession with perfection, stay away. Because no matter which way, I go, you seclude me. No more, no way, please you just lead me astray. These failures are all we pay. What's also interesting is, there seems to be sort of a blame being placed here. But again, I'm not entirely sure if the you here is referring to that voice in the chorus where there's this sort of other person saying, reach, for the sky, your mind is your limit, and Cecilia / the speaker doesn't quite believe them. Or if they're saying, perfection and the pursuit of it is leading them astray, or if they're saying, there's someone else, because as we looked at in the chorus, it almost appears as if Cecilia is trying to, fly high with a group of people rather than alone. And so not fully being sure of who that you is. It sort of has crypticness, which makes it feel like the speaker, this is almost feels like very much like an internal monologue where it's almost in a way sort of like an aside, in that it feels like Cecilia is more just saying this to herself, and only she has a crystal clear understanding of all of the context surrounding this, because we don't know why they're being led astray unless they are referring to perfection as being the thing leading them astray. Something else that's sort of interesting is once again we get a way, astray, and pay, and then we get that me again, which is once again in the line about perfection. And so in poetry, I think one of the coolest things about poetry is that everybody sort of has their own interpretation of things. And two people can read the same poem, and based on their own life experience or just, what movie they happened to see the night before or anything like that, they can walk away with totally different meanings. And that's sort of the whole concept of the death of the author, which is that once a piece is given to the audience, it is their piece, and so if they say something means something, the author isn't really allowed to argue with that. And so again, we either have it where it's this sort of, we can see this as a narrative of a group of people pursuing something, or we can see it as it is more of an internal monologue, because we can also see and interpret that sort of voice in the chorus that is setting too high of expectations for Cecilia. That could still be Cecilia herself. She could be putting those, those sort of expectations onto herself. And again, so we get the you here's interesting, because what is it that she's trying to tell to stay away? Is it sort of an almost intrusive thought? Or is it someone else who is, planting this doubt or being a distraction? And the reason why I bring up the distraction is because something is leading me astray, which is interesting that other verse had to do with just give up and stay here being, you're being cemented in one place, while lead me astray implies that you're being led away from the path that you're supposed to be on, and so now you're over here. So I find that very interesting, and I'm wondering if, as we go on with this sort of poem, if we might get a better understanding of what's going on here, because the we here is also what sort of makes this sort of cryptic, because if it was truly just, say Cecilia, slash the speaker, because I don't want to say that this is autobiographical, but if it is quote unquote Cecilia talking to herself and discussing her own sort of ambitions and doubts, then why would she describe it as these failures are sort of like the price that we all pay? It would just be like, these failures are the price I pay. So that use of we is extremely interesting. And again, there's sort of no more, no way, please again. So we saw please before, where it was please just give me a minute so I can basically catch my breath and try to do this. And now there's once again this sort of pleading. So it almost makes it sound like there might actually be an external force that is sort of acting as a negative influence. The other thing, though, that's interesting is once again with this line, the line has now changed from perfection you elude me to perfection you seclude me. And it's an extremely interesting difference, because when she was saying perfection you elude me, it seemed like she, wanted perfection but couldn't get it. But now it seems like that pursuit of perfection is something she has some sort of possession of, whether it's still just the pursuit of perfection or if she's been able to maintain a little bit of what she deems to be perfect, but she feels like it's unstable, which is causing all these other issues. Again, there's an obsession with it, etc. Here what's interesting is by saying it secludes me, you are then being secluded from others. So this pursuit of perfection is isolating her. And if it's isolating her from other people. So once again, that kind of goes back to this whole group concept of where there may be a semblance of Cecilia's part of a group. She alone has sort of this obsession with perfection, and that's driving her away from everyone else. It's leading her astray, and now, they're experiencing failures that they all pay. So let's jump right into the next passage and see if we can find a bit more clarity on things. Alright, so now we jump back into the chorus, and while I'm not going to do another full dissection because this is the same language as the chorus the first time around, I did want to point it out as that within the context of the poem, the poem is sort of telling a narrative. And so we have our starting point, our end point, and then we have all of this middle point. And we're deep in the middle of that. And so by restating the chorus, we're seeing that at this point in this narrative, Cecilia / the speaker is still going through all of these issues. They're still seeing their limits. They're still feeling that things are too high. And to them, it is still a lie that they want to reach further. And there's still all the struggle where they're trying to tell these intrusive voices / external actual authoritative voices to shut up because they're trying, and they're also sort of still pleading for just give me a minute or I'm going to fall apart. So just wanted to emphasize that within the context of this sort of narrative, we are still very much experiencing these feelings and struggles. So now we're at the bridge of the song, and so, the bridge usually serves to sort of be a transition or a sort of turning point or a sort of switch. And so knowing that, let's go into this and sort of see what sort of transition or switch may be occurring. So, wanting it all, but you can't pay the price. Dreading to fall, but it will not suffice. Seeking it out, but it cannot be your sacrifice. Give up your thoughts, you can always try twice. Live up again, and put all behind. Stand up, grow tall, and we'll all be by your side. So what's interesting is even within this transition, there still is some of those recurring thoughts. So it feels like a big part of this is that there's this pursuit of perfection, which is being sort of, through figurative language, is being visualized as flying high. So by the action of flying high, you will get to go to the sky, which equals sort of a goal or an ambition. However, by dreading to fall, which implies, you start flying and then before you can reach your objective, you fall down hard, there's that dreading to fail. But it will not suffice. So what's interesting here is Cecilia seems to be saying that her fear of failure is not sufficient reason to give up. She does want it all, even if she feels like she can't pay the price. Seeking it out, but it cannot be your sacrifice. See, this is another moment where there's a really interesting sort of cryptic vibe to this song / poem, in that it feels like what she's saying is that, by seeking her ambition, she can't let herself become destroyed by it. So it seems that, it's not just failure that is a concern to Cecilia, but it seems more so that it is a fear of getting hurt, almost as a byproduct of failure. So, for example, in the chorus, she describes sort of a fear of give me a moment or I might fall apart. And here she's saying that, you should still seek out your goals, but it shouldn't be at the sacrifice of yourself. So you shouldn't push yourself so hard that you end up hurting yourself in the pursuit of your objective. But that also doesn't mean you shouldn't try to pursue your objective. Because the thing is if you fall and you metaphorically scrape your knee and get hurt, you can still always get up again and try again. Try it twice. You can live it all up again and put these fears behind. You stand up, and by standing up you grow tall, and we'll all be by your side. So here's what's also interesting is that we'll all be by your side makes me almost wonder if this is a different voice that is talking to Cecilia. So we have, Cecilia, and on one shoulder she has all of this doubt, but also all of this sort of pressure. And now we get this other voice, and again, this could either be an external voice or just another internal voice, which is saying, you can always try twice. You can always try again, and, don't hurt yourself in the pursuit of this, but also don't be afraid to try and to fail, because you can always try again. And it sort of seems like in that pursuit of perfection, the sort of harm that would be being done here, the sacrifice being done here, is sort of an emotional pain of if you try something and you fail, you're going to suddenly be really down on yourself and start to think, oh, I can never do it, I was stupid to try, etc. But this is saying, no, don't beat yourself up. You can always try it again. And we'll all be by your side. Which makes me think again with that whole sort of like it's a group of people pursuing something. I think this is now the group is sort of encouraging Cecilia to keep doing it, because she's been hearing this voice of this other sort of antagonistic, authoritative person saying like, go, 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 go. And she's like, just give me a second, while everyone else is successfully flying high. But here it seems like this is her now getting encouragement from her peers, because they're all going to be by her side trying it as well as her. And it's also interesting with, again, the word choice. By standing up, you grow tall, and growing tall is seen as a good thing. So rather than getting hurt by the process, you're actually going to be growing by doing the process and trying your best. So in that sense of the transition, it seems to be mostly a transition of attitude. Alright, and so now we get to the final chorus, but in order to look at the final chorus, I wanted to sort of put it side by side by the previous chorus. So we have the previous one, and then we have the new one. And the reason I want to do that is because here we get to really see the, aftermath of that sort of transition and true change. And so, as I was saying earlier with sort of the narrative thing of a starting point and an ending point, the real ending is changing. Or the process is changing, and so when you end, you're a changed person. And that's usually how it goes with most stories. And so here, let's see how things have changed. So, to reread both, I'm going to read both versions. So we have, and now we wind up high, yeah, the sky is the limit. They tell me reach further, too bad I can't fly. So now shut up, I'm trying, oh just give me a minute. You tell me reach further, too bad it's too high. And so we wind up high, yeah, the mind is your limit. I want to reach further, too bad that's a lie. So now shut up, I'm trying, please just give me a minute, or I'll fall apart for a while. And then where new version goes, and now we wind up high, yeah, the sky is the limit. If I don't believe it, I guess that's just fine. So now shut up, I'm trying, oh, I'll test it and spin it. To win and revisit, I won't draw the line. And so we wind up high, yeah, my mind is the limit. I want to reach further, I cannot deny. So now let's touch the sky, please, just give me a minute and stay next to me for a while. So right away, one of the main differences that I'm noticing is that with this sort of, again, this narrative of a group of people are trying something and they're feeling pressure from someone else who's sort of instructing them, and just Cecilia is struggling. Now it feels like she's gotten encouragement from her peers. And so, they'll be by her side, as they said. And so now she's doing it together with them. And she seems encouraged. So while the first version, it feels like you're full of doubt, frustrated, and ready to give up, we now see a state of being encouraged, even if there's still a little bit of that doubt. There still might be a little bit, and maybe a little bit of frustration. But those are tampered by being encouraged. So the first line is the same, and now we wind up high, yeah, the sky is the limit, and now we wind up high, yeah, the sky is the limit. But here, it seems like this was originally seemed like it was a negative thing. The sky is the limit, and and I can't reach it. Too bad I can't fly. But now it's sort of acknowledgement of, yeah, the sky is the limit, and even if I don't believe it, I guess that's just fine. And again, the use of saying things like, I guess that's just fine, it implies that in this story, the ending point isn't necessarily like, I am so confident. This piece doesn't end with Cecilia being like, and now I've done everything all by myself, and I am perfect. I reached that perfection that eluded me, and everything's good. Here, they're still saying that, like, they're not going to draw a line between winning and quitting, because previously they were drawing the line of, like, if you don't win, then you're not perfect. And therefore, if you do win, you are perfect. Now they're not drawing that line. And so, they're going to test it and spin it to win it, and they're going to try it, and they're going to be willing to revisit it. So if they do all of this and they still end up failing, that doesn't mean they're going to give up. And so they wind up high, yeah, my mind is the limit. The mind is your limit. It's a very interesting change between the mind is your limit to my mind is the limit. Because the first version, it's someone else telling her, the mind is your limit. But here she's realizing, oh yeah, my mind is the limit. So whatever I put my mind to, I can do. There's a sort of ownership by, using the possessive my mind is the limit. And now she can't deny that she wants to reach further. So it's no longer a lie. It's now something she can no longer deny. And by saying I cannot deny is interesting, because it almost implies that every other time she was saying this, she was actually denying the truth. So it's not, I want to reach further because now I have a whole new perspective. It's her saying, yeah, I used to downplay my ambitions by saying, oh, oh, just kidding. That's just a lie. I don't really want to reach further. But here she's saying, I'm not going to deny that part of myself anymore. She's not going to deny her ambition. Which, again, to go back to what we're talking about with the first verse, about that sort of indolence, it really felt like that sort of indolence of giving up and just staying the same and not trying to do it, that actually was sort of a cover that was being used to deny ambition, to sort of shield herself from failure, or at least her fears of failure. And then it ends with, instead of saying, so, shut up and I'm trying, please just give me a minute. Now it's saying, okay, let's touch the sky together. And it's, let us touch the sky and just give me a minute and stay next to me for a while. So here, they're about to touch the sky. They haven't done it yet. They're still working towards it, but they're very close to their goals. And they're saying, let's just enjoy this moment. When she's saying, just give me a minute, it isn't out of this sort of desperation of, please just give me a minute or I'm going to fall apart. Now it's, let's just take a moment and enjoy this and just stay next to me a while. And here, what is so important about that, it is also a revealing of enjoying the process. Where before, the attitude was very much, you try something and you have to do it perfectly. And if you don't do it perfectly, then you're a failure. And if you do fail, then, that's going to hurt you and you're going to fall apart. And it's going to be this whole thing. And, there's sort of this exhaustion of give me a minute. They're not having any fun with the process previously. But now they're sort of relishing the process and in sort of enjoying doing it just for the sake of doing it, even if they don't end up reaching their goal this moment or not. However, by them being so close to the sky that they can almost touch it, it implies in a good way that things are going to work out well, and it really feels like this, next attempt is going to go really well, and they really will reach sort of that limit of their goals and their ambitions. And since their mind's the limit, that limit and goal may eventually go even further than the sky, because the mind is ultimately more vast and infinite in its ability to conceive things than just the sky. So, yeah, I think that pretty much concludes our little close reading of Wind Up by Cecilia Immergreen. I thought this piece was really interesting in that there seemed to be an entire, almost other narrative going on in the background that we weren't always able to see. We don't have a clear sense of who the other people are, if it's just one other person or if it's a group and it's sort of a community effort. And it's still not totally clear if sort of some of these harsher voices that are telling them to, reach further and stuff that feel nagging at first, if they really were nagging, or if Cecilia was just interpreting it that way, or if it wasn't even an external voice and it actually was an internal voice and it was her own sort of inner monologue telling her all this stuff and her own inner monologue sort of fighting against it. So it's a really interesting one, and to briefly compare it to some of the stuff we've looked at previously, I think it's very much interesting how it deals with this sort of starting point and ending point, where some of the other pieces, there's been a much more crystal clear ending where it's like I am now in the ending state and I have reached my goals, while this one seems to be basically saying, the end goal matters maybe a little bit less than actually the process of doing it and at least trying, because there is a sort of nobility to attempting things and retrying it over and over again, and not giving up, and also, again, not seeing failures or missteps being as a necessarily bad thing and a bad reflection of yourself, but that those bits of failure are also just part of the process, and seeing it all as a larger sort of umbrella of process, failure, success, it all fits together. So a really cool piece, and in general I really like this song. So I hope you guys had fun following along with this close reading. Again, I get that these are sort of niche videos, but I'm hoping it reaches the right audience where you guys will be enjoying doing this with me, because I have a lot of fun sort of doing these little deep dives on a poetic level. If you have any recommendations of things you'd like me to look at, please let me know. And if you had a totally different interpretation of this song than I did, please let me know. I'm super curious to see what other people might sort of get from this song. So yeah, that'd be awesome. And if you want to be around for the next one, it'd mean the world to me if you could subscribe, because helps grow the channel and just sort of gets there to be so there's more sort of a conversation going around with these pieces. So thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.